The other day, I was flipping through some old photos when I came across one of myself at 15. Different hair, embarrassing clothes, and a look in my eyes that I barely recognize now. I just stood there, staring at that image, thinking that was me. But also, it wasn't. In that moment, I felt the weight of what philosophers have wrestled with for centuries. Have you ever stopped to wonder if the you think you are is real? You? Every day, we wake up with this solid sense of who we are. But what if I told you that this identity is just an elaborate story your mind has crafted? As Nietzsche provocatively put it, there are no facts, only interpretations, and that includes the interpretation we make of ourselves. Today we're going to dive deep into the human mind to uncover the hidden truth behind your identity, exploring both sides of this fascinating debate. The notion of identity is something we rarely question. We assume that our self is a solid, constant entity that remains stable over time. However, when philosophers began to explore this concept, they uncovered something surprising. The self is far more fluid and fragmented than we might think. Plato was one of the first to suggest that our identity goes beyond the physical body, while David Hume, centuries later, boldly claimed that the self might just be a collection of perceptions with no permanent substance. Pause this video now and write down 5 words that define who you are. Now look at those words and ask yourself, which of these definitions existed 5 years ago? Which ones likely won't exist 5 years from now? Think about how you defined yourself 10 years ago. Your preferences, beliefs, ambitions. How much of that remains intact today? The Greek philosopher Heraclitus taught us that no one steps into the same river twice, because both the river and the person are constantly changing. In the same way, the you of yesterday is no longer the you of today. Neurologically speaking, your brain cells, neural connections, and even your memories are constantly shifting, literally creating a new person every day. Modern psychology reveals something even more intriguing. Much of who we think we are is constructed retrospectively. Michael Gazzaniga, a pioneering neuroscientist, discovered that our brain acts as a constant interpreter, crafting narratives to explain our behaviors, even when those explanations are pure fabrications. In a revealing experiment, split-brain patients would invent entire explanations for actions that were artificially commanded, fully believing those actions were their original intentions. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was particularly sharp on this point. He argued that the self is a grammatical fiction, a linguistic convenience that gives us the illusion of control. There is no being behind the doing, he wrote, suggesting that there is no fixed identity steering our actions. Instead, we are a continuous process of becoming, a perpetual dance of impulses, desires, and forces that we later organize into a coherent narrative called me. Social influence on our identity is another factor we often underestimate. Aristotle defined humans as political animals, recognizing that our nature is inherently social. Modern studies back this up, showing that our opinions, behaviors, and even tastes are deeply shaped by the groups we belong to. Have you ever noticed how your opinions subtly shift depending on who you're around? That's not a bug, it's a feature, your social mind at work. When it comes to memory, the essence of what we often consider our identity, the situation gets even murkier. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio demonstrated that our memories aren't static files, but active reconstructions made in the moment of recall. Every time you remember something, you're essentially rewriting that memory, adding new details and losing others. Your most cherished memories? They're probably quite different from what actually happened. The idea of an autonomous self has been questioned both by Eastern philosophy and recent neuroscience discoveries. Buddhism has taught for thousands of years the concept of anatta, or not self, suggesting that the notion of a permanent self is an illusion. Interestingly, modern brain imaging studies seem to support this ancient wisdom. Researchers like Thomas Metzinger argue that the self is just a model created by the brain, a useful simulation, but not a real entity. Consider how language shapes your perception of yourself. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein suggested that the limits of our language are the limits of our world. Cultures with different linguistic structures develop distinct concepts of identity. For instance, some indigenous languages don't use I in the same way Western languages do, favoring constructions that emphasize action and relationships over individual identity. This suggests that part of what you consider you is simply a product of your linguistic system. The social roles we play further complicate our sense of identity. Sociologist Irving Goffman compared social life to a theatrical performance, where we're constantly acting in different contexts. You're one person at work, another with friends, and yet another with family. Which one is the real you? The uncomfortable answer might be, none of them and all of them at the same time. As the saying goes, fake it till you make it. Often, the line between pretending to be someone and becoming that someone is surprisingly thin. Our choices, which we consider expressions of our identity, often aren't as free as we imagine. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet demonstrated in controversial experiments that our brain initiates actions before we're even conscious of the intention to act. A few seconds before you decide to move your finger, your brain has already made that decision. Philosopher Schopenhauer anticipated this idea when he wrote, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." Evolution has equipped us with a strong sense of identity for good reasons. A consistent sense of self is adaptive. It allows for long-term planning, social cooperation, and moral responsibility. However, as evolutionary psychologist Robert Kurzban pointed out, this doesn't mean that self is real in a deep sense. Just as the perception that the sun moves around the earth is useful for daily navigation, even though it's scientifically incorrect, our perception of a unified self may be pragmatically helpful, even if it's an oversimplification. Philosopher Martin Heidegger introduced the concept of Dasein, being in the world, suggesting that our identity isn't an internal object, but an active relationship with the world. You're not an isolated entity, observing reality through a window. You're a process, actively engaged with your environment. Like surfers who become one with the wave, your identity emerges in the dynamic interaction with everything around you. It's not what you are, it's what you're doing. Modern technologies are further challenging our traditional notions of identity. When you interact online, you take on slightly different personas on each platform. Is your LinkedIn self the same as your TikTok self? Probably not. As philosopher Andy Clark observed, our minds are already extending into external devices. We store memories in smartphones, outsource thinking to algorithms. Yourself is already dispersed across a technological network far beyond your physical body. The question of personal identity lies at the heart of philosophical debates about continuity. The ship of Theseus paradox asks, if all the parts of a ship are gradually replaced, is it still the same ship? Similarly, if all your cells, memories, and beliefs change over time, are you still the same person? John Locke suggested that memory continuity is what matters. But what if your memories aren't reliable? So, who are you really? Perhaps the question itself is flawed. As philosopher Alan Watts suggested, asking who am I is like asking what is this, while pointing at the entire universe. You're not a fixed thing, but a process, a complex dance of biology, culture, relationships, and narratives in constant evolution. The liberating truth is that you are both less and more than you think, less confined by rigid definitions, more connected to the world around you. Perhaps true identity isn't found in pinning down who you are, but in embracing the constant becoming of who you will be. So, did this journey of self-discovery mess with your head a little? I hope it did. If you're feeling a bit lost about who you really are, congratulations, you're getting it. That's exactly the feeling of someone starting to wake up to deeper questions. Let me know in the comments which of the practical exercises sparked the biggest reflection for you. I'm genuinely curious to hear. If this video stirred something in you, Don't keep it to yourself. Drop a like, share it with that friend who's always philosophizing about life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more explorations of the human mind that turn your world upside down. Remember, every subscription, comment, and like helps this content reach more people who, just like you, are searching for deeper truths.